This is the EnT podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranick. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Dr. Doug Reed, and I am located in Abagway, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
My name is Dr. Matthew Stranick, and I am located in Scoodic, in the traditional and unceded territory of the Passamaquoddy people. Well, hey there, one and all. Welcome to the latest EdNonTech podcast. Happy to see that we're into the month of March, which can only mean that spring is inching closer, I tell you what. And as well, with our 96th episode, if you can believe it, we are getting pretty close to episode 100. I believe that within this very season, we're going to crack the triple digits for the ENT, and that gives me no small amount of satisfaction, considering the very humble origins of this project, Doug. I am Matt Stranick. This is Dr. Doug Reed, and we couldn't be more pleased to have you with us. Doug, how are things going in your world today, my friend?
Things are going really well. Really well. So, thanks for asking. I did a bit of trivia yesterday and got my ego punctured because the last two times I went to this particular trivia, I won or finished second. And this time, we got stomped.
Jeepers creepers.
So it was nice. It keeps me humble. I got to hang out with some nice people, so that was well worth it. Winning could just be the cherry on top.
No trivial matter, as it were, right?
Nope, that's for sure.
Good stuff.
And how are you doing today? You all settled in?
Yeah, well, for those who might not keep track of all the goings on and things that get mentioned both on the show and possibly in other social media channels and formats, I've recently relocated from one small city in New Brunswick, which is St. John, kind of a larger city and a relatively small province, you could say, to a city, a town, which is by any definition a small place. 4,500 people here in St. Stephen, New Brunswick, which is notable for the Ganong chocolate presence, the factory and associated industries going back more than 100 years. I'm not going to try and date it more specifically than that, but also notable that there is, in fact, the U.S. border within fewer than 4 kilometers of where I'm presently sitting, although you couldn't necessarily tell from the background. I have to tell you, it's an interesting thing. There's a little bit of cognitive dissonance that goes along with that, but all things considered, it's some very rad personal circumstances that have led me to be in here, specifically a new relationship. And honestly, it's going better than I would have dared imagine, if I can put it that way. And so, yeah, real well. Thanks for asking, pal.
No worries. Glad to be able to air your laundry.
Absolutely.
So today, I want to talk about the linear progression narrative that exists in education. And in the notes, I included a little Facebook video, which is not something I've ever done before. But the video is what twigged me to, oh, right, I believe this. And I like examining what I believe. I like to say, why do I believe that? Do I still believe that? what's going on here? And that's where this conversation about narrative and the linear progression of education came from.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for setting us up there, Doug. And to begin with, I will definitely recommend that everybody checks out the website for the accompanying notes. I have managed to embed the Facebook video into the website. You don't have to be a Facebook member, it just shows up there and you can play it through. And I have to say, Doug, it was very compelling. I'm not sure if this was one of those kinds of clips that somebody forwarded to you or somebody shared with you, or if the algorithm just kind of foisted it on you by prompting it in your suggestions of media that you might
It was the
enjoy.
algorithm.
Okay. Well, the algorithm gives, and sometimes it gets one right. So
Yes,
far be
indeed.
it for me to question the prudence of our AI overlords, I suppose, and oligarchs. Thanks for the solid there.
Yes.
And I would also add that I really wasn't sure initially from the description where this was going to go. I really had to look pretty deeply at the notes which you shared and the references. And quite frankly, I think it's highly compelling, having done so. And correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, but we are going pretty back far into the Wayback Machine with
Oh,
these
yes.
references. Quite a ways back, as we've been known to do. So, with that rather hopefully not too digressive preamble, perhaps we can start talking here way back in the earlier part of the mid 19th century for this first little bit here you got, Doug.
Just before we do that, I have a question
Okay.
for you. I am wondering, in your life, did anybody tell you or allude to you that if you did this in school and you got this piece of paper at university, the result would be something else? Like, is it like a plus B equals great? Is that fair that might have been alluded to?
Interesting that you should mention it. Interesting that you should put that question to me forward. I have to say, I had a really, what do you call it? I want to say dysfunctional kind of upbringing. My parents divorced early. They were young. I kind of went through some bumps and ups and downs. I graduated from high school with a very low average. I did not really have much notion of doing a whole lot beyond just obtaining an initial degree, a BA degree, which, considering how I went at my studies in K to 12, is actually pretty surprising. So I suppose underpinning my kind of what negative regard for education while I was involved in it, I still kind of had this concept that if I wanted to get some kind of real or regular or fulfilling kind of job, that doing a certain amount of higher education was going to be the way to do it. And I've pursued since then graduate degrees. I've got the 4 university degrees set right now. And I kind of remember thinking when I finished my doctorate, I was like, well, I can't possibly do any more study. So surely I'm going to get hired. I'm going to be on the tenure track. I'm going to get tenure. I'm going to settle into just a really comfortable life, I suppose, on the basis of that's what I sort of assumed happened. And then that was back in 2017 when I successfully defended. And I can tell you, no word of a lie, that that entire narrative, pretty facile, pretty comforting kind of narrative that I was telling myself at the time, has been completely upended. And I have no concept of when, if, or how I'm going to make my living as an educator again. I'm at the point where I'm not too fussed about it, but really long-winded, meandering kind of way of saying, Doug, I had no sweet clue really that I was going to end up at this path because my a priori assumptions had all kind of given me to the notion of you put in inputs X, Y, and Z, and out you get with your piece of paper, and life will be sweet after that, right? How about you,
Yes.
Doug? Why don't you tell me about your experience?
I came from a family of teachers.
Right.
So teachers teach until they're 50 or 55 and they retire with a full pension and life is good. Then they hang out for however long they live and do all the other things. They live that retired life and the money's always there, and isn't life wonderful? And now I'm older than 55.
I wouldn't
And
believe it to look at you, sir, but you're saying it, I'll believe it.
oh yeah, I'm not worried about that. To be honest, I'm happy I have hair, right? Because ball caps fit on my head
Magnificent
really
hair,
nicely.
too. Absolutely.
So that's where this came from for me, where it's like, okay, I was sold a bill of goods, and that didn't happen. And I've been doing some other reading, and if you take a look at what AI has done to the computer science industry or the field, I am positive that for 15, 20, 25 years, people have been telling students, learn how to program, there'll be a job there for you. And is that the case? Right? Or is it, oh, too bad? Right? Oh, you believe that? Oh no, we were just. So it's that narrative. And I want to explore where it came from and does it help? Is it a positive force in our society, basically?
Never suggest anybody out there that we shy away from the larger existential questions on this show. I am
That's it.
compelled. And
So
so, does that bring us about the old legal indentures of 1840, Doug?
yes, it does. So I found an article from the U.S. Government Printing Office from 1908 by Wright, and it's called "The Apprenticeship System in Relation to Industrial Education." And I thought that this was so interesting for people that get a chance. If you're listening on the podcast, thank you so much. If you're watching the video, I found some history of technology in this article that I desperately wanted to share. And one of the images that I have is the card catalog, or the stamp. You know, the stamp you used to get when you borrowed a book from the library, you'd get that stamp. So at the same time that the university was lending this book out, they also had the electronic cards. It's where they had to like hole punch the cards, and you had to feed them into the machine at a very particular time, and it would read whatever the programming was on it. So I saw a picture of that in the article too, and it's like, I need to share that because we are the Ed Non-Tech podcast.
Sure to check the notes, folks.
Yeah. So there was goings on in society saying, how do we want to proceed with the trades? How do we want to proceed with industries that aren't office jobs, basically? And one thing they talk about is, they said the old legal indentures of 1840, all parties agreed as to the evils of the situation. And what that was, it was basically indentured servitude. You'd get a kid, and this would be a young kid, right? Preteen, who would start to learn your trade. You would be the master to teach them the trade. And what would happen was the promise that they would become an apprentice and then a journeyman and then a master themselves. And what was really happening was that opportunity wasn't existing. They were just basically indentured labor forever. and they were not skilling the students up. They were not giving the students a chance to thrive. They were just looking for cheap labor. And this 1908 article is talking about exactly that, about what are we doing? We've sold these children into indentured servitude, and it's been going on for years. By 1840, everybody agreed to it. It had been going on since the 1600s, according to the article. And then they talk about education by apprenticeship and education by schools have gone through many generations side by side and distinct. So you could go to a trade school or you could follow the apprenticeship model. And they were both unrelated forms of education, but you were both supposed to be learning the same thing. It was just different approaches to get there. And what they were trying to do is, how do we bring everything together? How do we make it all work for everybody? And I find that fascinating that 100 and nearly 20 years ago, they were talking about that. And we're still talking about what programs matter. How do we merge it? How do we change education? How has the technology impacted that? And I'm going to talk more about the technology impacting that. But I know you might have thoughts on this because you've talked about your son potentially going into to become an electrician.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about my awesome son, Ethan, who is in his second half at this point of grade 11. He's going into grade 12 in September of this year, and he is going to be hearing within this very month, the month of March, as to whether his application into a sort of trades program within the high school curriculum that also would award him university level credit at his local institution in Kamloops, BC, Thompson Rivers University, where Doug and I have passed some years ourselves in years past. And it's something where the program has been designed to fulfill high school level credit, university level credit, and as well to segue from a completely non-expert, non-knowledgeable role for my son or for anybody else who's in the program into the first ladder of a paid apprenticeship program, the completion of which holds out the promise of a Red Seal certification, which in Canada means that you can practice that trade anywhere in Canada without having to recertify province by province or according to whatever jurisdiction. And as a resource-based economy, as a service-based economy, the skilled trades really are, from what I can tell, never going to go out of style. They're never going to be lack of need for those kinds of roles. I'm somebody who is your basic English and philosophy major, and I've kind of stumbled into education as my way forward. But I recognize that that is very challenging in terms of wanting to have consistency within your career, in terms of perhaps planning on a retirement before the age of 60 or 55, which is something that has been desired over the years, right? You alluded to that earlier. And it also just, this kind of context that we're talking about here does put me in the mind of a quote that I saw from the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, in my Google News feed, where it talked about reductions of programs at Humber College, one of the major parts of the Ontario public colleges system. And he was commending them for undertaking this revision of resources, this revision of programming. And he said, I'd recommend that they start with cutting these basket weaving kind of courses. And you could almost hear the air quotes around it, right? And to me, that's just really short-sighted and really kind of sad, but it's also really indicative of the mentality that a lot of people kind of see from the outside looking in, that the only reason for education to exist is to perform a linear function of putting out people who are able to maximize their effectiveness within the paid workforce. Now, my son, I mean, he's somebody who's achieving really well within the typical academic framework. He's getting 90, 95 plus in all of his classes, including physics and the sciences and math and the like. He's achieving extremely well by any common standard that you'd have. But there's a lot of people that paradigm doesn't fit for, and there's a lot of people whose interests might not position them to be interested or willing to do a skilled trade or something that society currently is really rewarding, as it were. So I can see both sides of it. And again, thanks for the opportunity to shout out my awesome son, Ethan.
Oh, you're welcome. Because some of the things you said tied into other stuff that Wright said in this article.
Awesome.
And it was as they were bringing things together, they basically set up the narrative that said, oh, apprenticeship is about skill and school is about intelligence. So they were trying to figure out how to merge those two, which I think is a false
Completely.
framework. Right?
Yeah.
I know a lot of really smart people that are in the trades, and I know a lot of people that aren't very smart that are in academia.
Right.
And I'm not going to name names, but they're there.
That's generous of you, Doug. We can name names some other time, but not on the podcast.
Yeah, that'll be at another time. But one last thing, because I love this article so much, they had this one phrase at the end of the article: the propagandism is being carried to all parts of the country. So it was the people that wanted the internships to stay, the people that wanted the school to stay, and they both wanted, like, let's only have one. And it was just the propaganda battle continues. And here
Absolutely.
we are more than 100 years later, and we're having similar types of propaganda to try to sell whatever narrative that people are trying to sell. So I just
Exactly
found it
so.
interesting.
Totally.
So I would like to jump now to Riley, 1999. Nonlinear systems and educational development in Europe. And I really enjoyed what Riley had to say. It was the perceived failures of education are particularly difficult for political and educational leaders to understand, because they're looking at it linearly. They're looking at, we have this much money and this much time and this many resources, and that is going to equal output. And output is going to be in students trained to fill in the necessary slots in society when they graduate. So that linear expectation where output is proportional to the input, that's freaking crazy. I can't believe in 1999 people were still believing that. That is not the way things work. So I'm just curious and I could see how EdTech fits here. And I'm wondering, can you see where EdTech fits when it comes to the linear expectations?
Well, ed tech, and I also found myself thinking of instructional design broadly. Sort of, you can apply certain kinds of variables to certain kinds of inputs, and then through a predictable, repeatable process, you get a certain return on your investment on those resources, as it were. And while it's helpful and necessary to be able to plan education so that people are actually learning what is intended to learn, and through perhaps preferable, efficient, effective methods, still, I think what we've been talking about since the beginning of this show is that humans are very complex, education is a very complex and contextually bound, and I think that's important, contextually bound phenomena. It's something that really depends on individuals as individuals, and these sort of top down, high level first kind of prescriptions and plans, the further above the ground you get, the further up you go looking at things, the more it tends to become abstracted, and the abstractions then I think lose a lot of the view of quality, which is the essence of real learning and real teaching, in my opinion, Doug.
I I agree with all that. That abstraction is so important, and that part of the narrative, like when the people making the big decisions don't get it, yeah, why are they the ones pushing the narrative? When I was teaching elementary school, I taught social studies because I love it, and I had no choice, right? It was part of the job. One of my learning outcomes was almost always for the students to become good citizens in the future, right? And I believed having this background social studies knowledge would help with that. And I had a guy one time say, well, how are you going to measure that? And it's like, well, I'm going to talk to them in 10 years and see how they're doing. And they're like, well, how do you measure that in class? And I'm like, why do I need to measure it in class? Right? That's not what we're doing. I'm trying to make them good people. I'm trying to help them on their path. And you're trying to say that learning outcome's no good because you can't measure it today. Well, let's throw all the learning outcomes out then. There's no way anybody could measure anything today unless every day was just test time. And anyway, I thought that guy was an interesting piece of work, but it's just how, like, even the narrative we're telling ourselves as educators and as leaders, yeah, we're nuts. We know better, but we're still doing it. It's still easy to do it. So I just, it's not just students being sold a bill of goods in my world. I think it's we're telling ourselves stories that are just ridiculous. And how do we change the messaging? How do we make it work better for everybody?
Well, and I do appreciate your future forward kind of learning outcomes with the encouraging students to be better citizens. I think as well, anytime you have that kind of statement, it is possible at the planning level to actually include activities wherein, if you are giving them a sense of what it is to be a good citizen, that is itself a set of conceptual resources which will serve them both in the short term and in that longer term. And so 10 years, 20 years out, as it were. And so educators, if hopefully they're motivated, are at their best going to be sharing through their actions, right? Through the way that they teach, the way that they carry themselves, and the kinds of points they emphasize, the values that are going to substantiate the curriculum, that are going to go along with as an additional bit, right? How this person
Yeah.
carries himself is indicative of whether or not they're just going along with the curricular script, so to speak. So appreciate your anecdote there, Doug.
Well, part of the resources invested lately, the massive influx, has been technology. It's been the computer labs. It's been the iPad carts. It's been the laptop carts. It's been the whiteboards, smart boards, data projectors, clickers, whatever. It's been all that. And so I just look at it and say, we're not measuring the right stuff. We're measuring, the metrics don't work, right? If you measure the right stuff, it works. But it's only one part of the picture. It's one of those things. One of those things.
Well,
I just find it interesting.
And I think just your description now about it doesn't measure the right stuff, so to speak, that aligns really nicely with this next quote that you've
Yeah.
included from 2001, and a very compelling visual. Got to give you credit on that visual. It's a good one. And just as you were speaking just now, I was looking at that visual and going, okay, yes, yes, this is exactly what we're trying to get at here.
Yeah. Can you introduce it? Sorry, I just had to take some notes. I was just hoping you could read the.
Pardon me. I'll take that as an opportunity to speak to the quote that's here then. In an era that everything around us is changing at incredibly fast rates, the contemporary human being, as well as the social structures that he slash her has built during the ages, are trying to cope with new demands that are being created.
And
It does go on.
it does. It does. And it's Anastasides in Ritalis 2001. It's an educational process in the emerging information society. And thank you for doing that. You had just said something really, really nice. So I needed to put that in as the phrase of the podcast because I knew I wasn't going to remember if I kept talking.
I'll be quite interested to know what it is when we get there, pal.
Okay. So the illustration is illustration of conventional linear model of education. This is the narrative we are trying to push. The students start, and basically when they're 5 years old, 6 years old, the school takes them. And when they're 17, 18, the school gives them back, and they go from untrained to ready to take their place in productive society. That is basically the model that we are trying to sell them. So it's start of the training procedure, educational assembly line. They do this thing for 12, 13 years, and then end of the training procedure, and they're done. It's like, seriously? Do people really think that? It's like we're going to take students at the beginning of their childhood and give them back at the beginning of adulthood and say, yep, they're ready now. Sorry, some of these really wind me up because I can't imagine it, but I don't think people just fit into slots. I just don't believe it. That's my bias.
Well, and I have to think, I mean, it uses the term here, Tayloristic, which I kind of have to do some Google searching to kind of get at that. I almost think of it as being a bit Dickensian, Charles Dickens, and with the late and middle Victorian period, where the horrors of early industrialization were being highlighted by Dickens, notably, but then others who were involved in that world, who lived in that era, and through fiction and other means sort of discuss about how these advances in technology had corresponding hardships and harms for the environment, for the urban poor, for the cities, for people, for human experience. And as we've talked about on the show before, so much of the model that we have in K to 12, and I suppose in post-secondary as well, goes back to this kind of industrial sort of notion. You put students in a room with the seats facing in rows towards the front, and you have a hierarchical kind of relationship with the educator, ostensibly, who's at the front in a position of authority, where information is transmitted and not necessarily taken on through any kind of constructive kind of viewpoint, but rather rote memorization and the like. And it's really meant to keep the children productive in as much as they're being stuck in a place and the energies that they exert are put into very specific outputs, which outside of that own initial context doesn't really have much value or meaning, but it prepares them mentally for a world in which they're assigned to one part of a machine, perhaps. They're carrying out their one repetitive task, as it were, esoteric and contextual bound, context bound, as it were, and just really being prepared for that kind of life and without too much agency, without too much to look forward to, without too much to contribute beyond a very limited, de-skilled, finite kind of set of tasks over time.
And along with that, the other half of the quote is talking about hoping the student will be able to respond creatively to the constantly increasing demands. So what you just described, I didn't hear a whole lot of creative stuff in there.
No.
I just didn't. I'm not trying to pick on what you said, but that's what we're doing. Like when we decide to change curriculum, what's the first thing people cut? Right? It's like, yep, let's get rid of art. Let's get rid of music. Let's get rid of any of the creative expression curriculum. But we're expecting them to creatively respond to what happens to them in their lives. Really? Is that the narrative we're trying to sell? Like, when I rephrase it, I don't think anybody would buy that. I just don't, because I'm not a good salesperson. I'm just not.
Well, you're good at a lot of things, Doug. We can't all be great at everything.
Oh, yeah. I'm not worried about being good at being a salesman. I do my best to help people. That's my dharma. So now I had a chance with this fourth article. It's by Syme 2017. Assembly lines or assemblages. And I thought, what a fantastic title.
That's a really great title, definitely.
It is. And this author is a prof at Acadia University, or was when this article was published. I don't think I've ever, I went to Acadia. I have 2 degrees from Acadia, and I don't think I've ever included an article from Acadia before. So that just made me feel good. Let's get
Awesome.
that in before we get to 100, that sort of thing.
Definitely.
And the quote, I love this quote. With an ordered school environment and curriculum built to serve the stated needs of industrialization and capitalism. I was going to just stop it right there. Just stated needs of industrialization and capitalism. The freedom of students to explore and express is tempered by the initiatives intended to ensure that curricular practices are standardized and measurable. How the heck do you standardize and measure something when it's about freedom to explore? It's the contradictions. The contradictions are just there in all of these narratives. And I just love the fact that this author just brought it out, right? We're not doing this for the students. This is the stated needs of industrialization and capitalism. So much of what I think we're struggling against is that it's he said the quiet stuff out loud, and I think we've done a lot of that too. So I think we need more art. I think we need more of a lot of things and less of the hoop jumping, less standardized tests. Right? I don't see any freedom of students to explore in standardized tests. When you go into any of the computer systems, like with technology, when you buy that vendor's product, how much exploration room is there? It's jump through the hoops to get to the end result so you can send an email to your instructor to say, yeah, I finished it. Sorry, that's a little bit of a rant, but I
Well,
just
that's
loved how
fine.
they got to the point.
It kind of puts me in the mind a bit, maybe tangentially, of the Pareto principle. 80% of your value comes from 20% of your function, right? Within a learning
Yeah,
tech paradigm. So, really, you could almost say the same for the curriculum, right? You have people who are just trying to achieve sort of the basics relative to a complex curriculum to indicate that they are capable of performing such tasks. It's really not so much about mastering a set of content as it is sort of a set of practices. Am I trainable? Can I jump through the hoops? Can I show evidence of being able to jump through smaller hoops or hoops that are hanging with a sword beneath it or what have you, right? I mean, not to
yes,
strain the metaphor too much, but to speak to my really well achieving son, and I don't mean to diminish his achievements whatsoever, but I mean, he's somebody who he has everything going for him. He's a middle class kid. He lives in a nice house. He lives in a nice neighborhood. He's one of the best players on his basketball team. He's got really supportive friends. He's neurotypical, to use a term, in the high degree. He's capable of succeeding in all the ways that people can succeed. And so for him, it's no great challenge to get to the point where you can grab that little scrap of content that's hanging there beneath all the scaffolded within all these practices and aspects of culture that people slip up and they can't get to, not for any fault of their own, but due largely to the way that it's been shaped and arranged in society and what it's actually meant to achieve relative to what it purports to achieve. And anyway, my young man, I'm very proud of him, very proud of him, but he's sort of a case of the exemplar of what these things are able to achieve. Whereas I just finished working with a pretty neurodiverse cohort within an after school sort of setting for a few months for before I absconded to St. Stephen. But just my limited insight into this world was that, wow, I mean, if the objective is to be standardized and predictable, there's a whole crew out there who are just being failed by that on a regular basis, right? So that's kind of where
yeah.
my mind went with that quote, Doug.
Thank you for that, because that ties into a lot of my thought. Was like when I went to university, I learned more outside of class than I did inside of class. Right? The curriculum were those 5 courses a year for 3 years, because I'm that old. You could get a BA in 3 years. But I learned so much more outside of class. I got to explore my interests. Like when I was an undergrad, the way they did registration in second year was horrible. It was second years got whatever was left. First years got pick of everything because they're just coming in. And second years got what was left after the fourth year's finished, after the third year's finished, and this is what you had. And the day before I had to register, because it was a day, you went down to the gym and you went from table to table to try to get into courses. I didn't get I picked 6 courses. I was like, okay, these are the 5 I want, and I'll take a safety. I'll take this other one. That'll be okay. The only thing I got was the safety. And then it was like, what do I do? What are my other 4 courses? And I'm wandering around the room trying to find whatever, and had people saying, nope, sorry, that's gone now. Nope, sorry, that's gone now. So my classes second year were horrific, right? I didn't enjoy any of them. So I took a non-credit math course that most people were taking because they needed a math, like needed to redo some kind of math to get into something else. And then I took it, and they're like, why are you taking it? And it's like, I like math. And they're like, what? So I had to find my own path. I had to find my own way to explore and my own way to have some initiative. And it didn't fit. It just didn't fit into the curriculum. Like, nobody could understand, why would I take 6 courses just to have a non-credit math? It was like, because I like math. I don't know if I was being too honest or too blunt, or I wasn't following the path, or whatever it happens to be. So
It's making the other courses tolerable, is what it is. It's
yeah,
adding quality to my existence that without it, I wouldn't have the mental or emotional ability to get through these other things that I didn't really want, but needed to, because that is the way that this particular institution is set up at this exact moment. And going along with it is preferable to doing anything else.
thank you. I have been thinking about that for 35, 37 years or so. And you just put it together really nicely for me. So thank you for your perspective on that.
We all do what we can, Doug.
Yep. Some of us, and we all have good days and bad days.
It's true.
Some days I think I'm awesome. Other days I don't. It's just how that works, I guess. But it's the I see this narrative of here's the lockstep. You do this, and then this happens. And I don't know if it was just me. That's why I asked you early on if it was just me. And I would like to go to the Fox and Guadagnino 2024 article. What is education for? This one is what I needed to end with. This is the narrative I believe in, that nobody sold me. And I butted heads with people my whole career about this. And the quote is, one vision, the one I and others embrace, values certificates, degrees, and transfer, but sees learning as valuable in and of itself. The other vision sees learning as a means to an end. Students learn the material in order to pass classes that lead to a certificate, to a degree, or to transfer. Like if you're in the people here worked at a college, so they were sending students off to a 4-year program afterwards. But I believe that learning is valuable in and of itself. So much of my learning had nothing to do with pieces of paper. Right now, I have this random collection of old wooden hand planes for woodworking that I pick up here and there over the years. And it's like, okay, I'm going to use them now. I've had them for years. I'm going to use them now. And getting rust off metal cutting blades that are 100, 200 years old, I don't know how to do that, but I'm learning. Awesome. If I was doing it for a career, I'd go buy an electric router. I actually have one in my garage I haven't used in years, because this is more interesting to me. The learning of how to care for the tools and how to make things work the way they used to appeals to me. If it was only about do this to get that done, I'd go use the router outside in my garage. And I know we've talked about we would never suggest anybody follow our paths. I think that's a fair comment from, right? Nobody should follow our paths.
Definitely not.
But at least with our narratives, we're telling people this has been our path. As opposed to, no, do this, right? Jump through each of these hoops and then you'll be good. No, how old do people have to get? I think it's part of the geezer complex, or the geezer dilemma. It's you get to a certain age and you stop caring what everybody else thinks. And it's okay, you told me this, it was complete BS, but I moved on, or somebody told me that and it was the most important piece of advice I've ever got. So I'm just looking at when you see learning, because I have my bias. I'm a lifelong learner, right? You've called me a polymath or something. I don't know, whatever it was. You had a phrase for it that I don't remember. I'm just wondering what your thinking is to wrap up this narrative conversation. What do you think about this Fox article
Well, I
or the
think,
Fox quote?
yeah, totally. I believe that learning for its own sake, I just couldn't agree with anything more. And I think it's a wonderful way to go out in terms of the resources that you've shared with us here. I've been pretty deep in my own kind of rabbit holes where I started out from the one book, right? Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And
Yes.
I became familiar with it enough where I thought, okay, he does mention Plato throughout this a little bit. He does mention one or two other writers throughout this a little bit. Maybe I'll try and find out some more about these writers. And so, because I've now been kind of off the professional path again since May of last year, I've had the opportunity where I see it to follow up on some of these writers. And so re-engaging, and I've mentioned this season on a few episodes, with Plato as well as some of
Yes.
his contemporaries, that has been a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous privilege for me, where I know that it's giving me an enriched quality of life. It's given me an enriched way of looking at the world. Does that have any particular tangible benefit? Is it making me more employable? Is it something that's somebody's going to see it on my LinkedIn and go, you're just the man for this college teaching job or associate dean or whatever? Like, no, of course it isn't. And it's helped me rationalize and understand my place in the world a little bit. Maybe to jump back just a tad to our previous episode about hiring and education, because I think this discussion about linear processes is tied, at least implicitly, with the notion of the linear career. You do enough things right in your educational life, then you have the habits, you have the skills, you have the knowledge to do the correct things in your professional life, and away you get until the very comfortable padded retirement age 55 or 60. I mean, I'm close enough to 55 now where I'm like, there's just no imaginable future in which I will be able to stop working at that point. And so I have to go, okay, well, what does my world look like between now and then? And how am I going to be comfortable on my own terms? And so to me, it cuts to the heart of it by referring to Socrates' dictum from 500-ish BC, Athens, Greece, where his real insight, the thing that he really found himself honing throughout most of his life, was not knowing, wanting to know. And knowledge is virtue, which is to say, it's good for its own sake. And you never have the complete picture because you can't handle it, because you're just a very finite little human entity compared to the whole of all human existence and the cosmos generally. So that's kind of where that quote puts me, Doug, to wrap things up from the references here.
Yeah. And to me, if I go to Middle English, I think it's cottywomple. I think it's to travel purposefully toward an as yet unknown destination. I think that's what we're doing with our lives. And I think the more learning we do, the better it is for us on our journey. So you
Spoiler
had all
alert, or perhaps it's not even a spoiler at this point. That very definition, that very term is posited as a visual, which you can now see at this point in the Camtasia recording, as well, of course, by visiting our website and the corresponding show notes. So thank you for that, Doug.
you're welcome.
Cottywomple.
Cottywomple. That's what it is. I've been coddywampling for a while, and I'm happy when I do that. I know I'm headed forward. I'm trying new stuff, and I keep learning. And hey, let's keep doing this. I think it's great.
Well, is
I
that
see
your
this
favorite?
this
Sorry, go ahead.
podcast. This podcast is part of the coddywampling that we have done. Because 10 years ago, we didn't even know each other, and I wouldn't have randomly called you up and said, "Hey, let's do a podcast." Right? We meandered to get here, and we had our reasons, and we're 4 seasons in now. So I like the results
And
of some coddywampling.
we're at the point for me where I look at it and go, okay, my entire engagement with Thompson Rivers University, where we first struck up our acquaintance and professional relationship and whatnot. I mean, that was my entire duration at that place. So the fact that this podcast within 6 months is going to exceed the entire amount of time of that whole framing context, to me, that just kind of speaks to the persistence of a enriching collaborative endeavor, pal. So I certainly have had moments wherein these gaps in my employment or whatever, where this is something I can apply myself towards it and go, okay, I'm still learning about teaching and learning. I'm still involved. I've still got skin in the game, so to speak. And it's enhanced and continues to enhance my quality of life in ways that I can't even really adequately express, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, me
So,
too.
Doug, was that Coddy definition your favorite visual that we've got here, or do you have something even better or something that jumps out at you equally or more so from among your very judiciously curated digital clutter?
Cottywomple to me was a whimsical way to balance your Aristotle and Socrates and philosophy stuff. I thought that'd be a ridiculous kind of balance. I have a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon where Calvin is
Fantastic.
just kind of ranting. Where are the flying cars? Where are the moon colonies? Where are the personal robots and the zero gravity boots? Huh? You call this a new decade? You call this a future? Ha! So that's the narrative Calvin got sold, and where is it? Where's all this stuff I was promised? So I enjoyed that. Did you have any of them? Any of
Well,
these?
apart from the fact that Calvin and Hobbes is an eternal part of pop culture that deserves more attention than it ever got, and hopefully will continue to. Bill Watterson, what a genius that guy was.
Oh yeah,
I liked here. I'll put out two of them just because they're kind of one after the other. I like your assembly line looking graphic of graduates just kind of rolling off an industrial looking conveyor belts. And I just, to me, that's like, okay, yeah, that's pretty much the objective. That speaks really well and succinctly to everything we've been talking about here today. And then right above that, I like the quote you have from John Dewey, which every
yes.
time I see John Dewey's name, I think, man, I got to dive in on him a lot more than I have. I got to pick up some of those writings of his and really spend some time with it. But this quote that you've got placed as visual: education is not preparation for life, education is life itself. Wow, way to just frame exactly how I feel about it. So,
Isn't it great when we could just attach it to, yep, just what Dewey said. Yeah, I agree with Dewey, right? If somebody wants to argue with Dewey, it's like, good luck, right? It's like arguing with Vygotsky. Good luck to you. You're not gonna
when I
win,
was
but
doing my when I was doing my doctoral study at University of Calgary, and I had for one of the seminars Randy Garrison of Garrison and Colleagues Community of Inquiry
yeah,
model. He prefaced his remarks early on by saying everything I've done in my career, I can trace back to John Dewey. So that's high praise
Yeah.
indeed, considering how much of my life has been, for better or for worse, engaged with and through the community of inquiry framework and Garrison and colleagues and University of Calgary and all that goes along with that. But yeah, just really some words of substance there from a substantial thinker in the John Dewey quote there, pal.
Absolutely. So I have three last things.
Awesome.
The word, question, and phrases of the podcast. The word of the podcast is narrative, because that's what I wanted to talk. I wanted to talk about the linear nature of it and what happens when the narrative's not true, right? Like, because people find that. Question of the podcast: how does the linear narrative in education shape students' lives? That's what I'm wondering if anybody wants to talk to us about that. I would love to have a conversation about that, because I'm sure there's positives. I know there's negatives. So it's just one of those questions. And phrases of the podcast, they're both yours. This is exactly what we are trying to get at here, which I really enjoyed. And adding quality to your existence. And isn't that what learning's all about? And living life. And that's all I got.
Well, that's fantastic, Doug. Appreciate the opportunity, as always, to speak on these matters and others. And folks, if you're having a look at the notes, if you're watching these recordings, don't hesitate to reach out. We appreciate engagement wherever and however we can. I've had, over the past month or two, a few different requests from individuals and entities to be interviewed for the show, and they're still kind of up in the air, but we are definitely open to hearing from people. Doesn't have to be an interview request, just whatever you care to comment on, and try, maybe your hand at the question of the podcast or one of them. And we are open for interviews. It's going to be something I'm going to be delving into a little bit, and Doug will be perhaps joining up for some of those. So if you think that maybe you'd like to speak with us about your area of practice or expertise or anything like that, then by all means, the email address is up on the website. And I guess that's all I've got. Doug, is there anything else you wanted to share before we sign off?
No, nothing at all. But had a lot of fun, and I'm glad you're all settled in and things went well.
Absolutely. Take care, everybody. Thanks a lot for being here, and see you again next time.
Bye-bye.